Welcome to Straight Outta Health IT. Getting into health tech is rough, but here's an unfiltered dialogue of healthcare leaders and influencers covering a wide variety of issues affecting healthcare and the health tech industry. And now your host, Christopher Cunny.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Straight Outta Health IT, where we dive into the cross-section of health technology and the human spirit. I'm your host, Christopher Cunny, and today we have an incredibly inspiring guest on the program today, Terry Healey. Terry is a motivational speaker, an author, and a cancer survivor who has his experiences to share that has inspired countless people around the world. And specifically, Terry is a fibrosarcoma survivor, which is a very weird type of soft tissue sarcoma, which is a cancer that arises from fibrous tissue in the body. This tissue includes tendons, ligaments, connective tissues that support the muscles and organs, which is really interesting. Fibrosarcoma can occur in various parts of the body, but most specifically is commonly found in our extremities, the trunk of our body, the head and neck regions. Fibrosarcoma is known for being a very aggressive cancer and has the potential to reoccur after treatment, which is why long-term follow-up care is essential for patients who've been treated with this type of cancer. To share more about his cancer journey and his triumph over this very tragic type of cancer is Terry. Hi, Terry. Nice to meet you. And
hi, Christopher.
Straight Outta Health IT.
Thank you so much. Great to be here, Christopher.
Happy to have you. I always say, I didn't talk a little bit about your background, so I'm going to let you do that and share a little bit about who you are, what you do, what you're doing, what you're passionate about right now. But more importantly, telling this story and this journey of being diagnosed with this very rare form of cancer and how you navigated that. I'll stop there and turn it over to you.
Okay. Sounds good. Yeah. So when I was about 20 years old, I was a senior at UC Berkeley. I got this bump that was pushing the right side of my right nostril out. And honestly, I didn't even notice it. It took someone else to actually ask me if there was something going on with my nose. And ultimately that led to this diagnosis that you eloquently explained what a fibrosarcoma is. It is incredibly rare. And so it took 8 weeks to get the right diagnosis. They could not necessarily easily figure out what this thing was. Fortunately, I got the right diagnosis because sometimes patients don't, and that's obviously a horrible situation to be in if you're not being treated for the right type of cancer. But you also described it does recur, and 6 months after my initial diagnosis, which, by the way, left me looking exactly the way I did before when they just removed this little tumor. Mm-hmm. When it recurred, it was a whole different story. And that's when it resulted in the removal of half of my nose, the shelf of my right eye, the muscle and the bone from my right cheek.
Oh, my goodness.
Part of my upper lip, part of my hard palate, 6 of my teeth.
Oh, my God.
And I woke up in the hospital at UC San Francisco attached to my chest because they had transplanted a full thickness skin graft for my chest to fill in this cavity that had been created on my face. But ultimately, that was the ordeal that took me down a path that I would describe as initially dark, but ultimately transformational.
Sure.
And it took years of hard work, but I came out the other side and here I am.
No, that's an amazing story. And congratulations on overcoming the physical aspect of this as well, too. And I'm sure that you continue to have regular checkups and follow-ups related to this as well, too. But what a powerful example of really turning adversity into triumph. I'm just curious, especially as someone that young, I can imagine if I was in my early 20s and was diagnosed with an illness of this type, and then for it to come back so aggressively, as you described, to completely alter my life, my trajectory in life, but also physically alter me as well. How did you manage through that? How did you deal with continuing to keep yourself motivated? Who were the people that might have been in your life to help support you through that journey? Just curious, take us through that whole journey that you went through.
Yeah, I think when I woke up, I looked very different. And I don't think that I was necessarily prepared for that, although it wasn't a complete surprise. The interesting part of it was that I think to keep me encouraged, my medical team had told me that they'd get me reconstructed back to the way I looked before. And so I think that glimmer of hope kept me going for a while. As the years ensued, though, and I began to realize this wasn't going to be a quick turn kind of thing and that I was going to struggle with this for a while, that's when I started to suffer from a lot of my confidence started to be impacted, my self-esteem. I began to remove myself from social situations, et cetera. And I reached this point where I was down in a pretty dark place and realized, hey, I got a choice here. I have a choice to live this kind of life or figure out how to improve it, because hopefully I've got a long leash ahead of me and a long life ahead of me. And I was fortunate, Christopher, that I think I ran into some walls, if you will, and stumbled into some things that I decided these are naturally things that are coming to me that make me think that this will help me. And what they were basically...
That's interesting.
Yeah, it's like my evolved survival kit, but there's a whole slew of things in it. But one of the things that, the two key things for me was, one was focusing on what I could control. And what I mean by that is I began to realize I couldn't control the outcomes of the surgical procedures that I was having. They couldn't seem to get me reconstructed back. Certainly it was taking more steps back than forward. So you begin to question. And so I thought to myself, I'm 21 years old now. Appearances matter a lot at that age. Sure. So I began to, I always had this workout regimen, but I started setting goals for, okay, I'm going to run a 10K in X time. I'm going to bench press X amount. And so I began these workout routines pretty intensely. And I think that exercise and those types of outlets definitely help.
Absolutely.
Just set the tone for the day, number one, but also make you feel good, better about who you are. And the other thing was I had secured a job, my first job out of college, that I began to set a lot of professional goals there. And it was a startup environment in high tech that really was fortunate in that they were growing so fast that they didn't really have the processes, the things in place to actually drive the business forward. So they looked to me and everybody else in the company, hey, come up with these ideas on how you're going to improve things. So I just began to immerse myself and work really hard. And I think as I started to achieve goals there and get promoted, that also started to help rebuild my confidence. And those were two stepping stones that led to many other things. But that's when I started to rebound, started to feel better about who I was as a person.
No, that's great. And to your point, I think you have to find these other outlets that create more value for you too. And I think too, you start to realize how superficial things can be sometimes in our lives, especially at that age as well too, that as you're going through that and as you want to overcome the health side of that, now you're thinking about how I look as a young man. What is this going to mean in terms of my prospects for dating and jobs and all? And the fact that you were able to secure a job despite all of that, and not only that, but successfully at that job, is a testimony to your outlook on life as well too, and your perseverance in dealing with this and really looking at this thing as a testimony and not a test. So you can inspire others who are going through similar journeys and similar challenges in their lives. As we go through these types of issues, whether it's ourselves or our loved ones, patient engagement is an important part of this process as well, too. How do you think your experience as a patient can inform healthcare providers how to interact better with their patients as well?
And this is one of the things that I've been fortunate to do is speak at a lot of nursing conferences, is that, and medical conferences as well, but symposiums, but it's really this making sure that the care providers out there understand that there are incredibly inspiring things that they do every day and can do that can change the trajectory of a patient's outcome.
Right.
And so I think a lot of that is taken for granted. I don't think that there's as much of that information out there. And I think that leads to even more nursing burnout. They don't feel the reinforcement of why they do what they do. But
give me an example. Yeah, give me an example of time where, that your care team did something that inspired you or helped get through a dark place?
Yeah, no, I'll give you one example.
Sure.
Adrienne was a nurse at UC San Francisco, and she was very tuned in, I think, to me as a young man. She wasn't a whole lot older. And she came into my room one night and she had to cleanse all the dressings on my chest because I had this transplanted tissue from my chest attached to my face. So basically what that meant was I had hundreds of staples on my chest.
Right.
So this was a intensive cleansing process that she had to go through to treat it, clean it, redress it.
Sure.
It took painstaking effort. And when she was done, she walked over to my door. She shut the door. She turned off the lights and she walked back over to my bedside. She pulled up a chair and she looked at me and she said, "Is it okay if we pray together?"
Oh, wow.
And she knew that I was open to that because religious faith was a big deal to me.
Right.
And so I said, absolutely. And she grabbed my hands and we prayed for my courage and my strength. And I got to tell you, that was one example of an incredibly powerful moment for me. And I think that sometimes it's okay for nurses to go to that place of intuition, right?
Yeah.
The intuitive nurse knows a lot. And
exactly.
she knew that I'd be open to that. And she knew
There's power in prayer. That's for sure.
Yeah. And maybe that's not for everybody. She was tuned into me. She knew that would work for me. But I think positivity combined with prayer is a great recipe, just thinking positive thoughts. So that was one example, but I like to share different stories because I think they're all surprised sometimes when they hear these stories. And unfortunately, they don't have a lot of time to do things like that. So
sure.
maybe that's not a natural thing that they could add to their workload. But in all honesty, it took 60 seconds, right?
And to your point, sometimes we get so caught up in our day-to-day job of just doing the job, we forget there's a human element to this. This is a person that's going through a very critical time in their lives. And I've got to think about the human side of this as well, too, and not just the physical care of the patient, but I would also have to touch and tap into the mental and spiritual part of this individual to hopefully inspire them so that they can use that as a way of recovering faster and better as well, too. So, great example of that as well. Obviously, this podcast is called Straight Outta Health IT, so I can't not talk about technology, right? To some degree. Talk to us a little bit about some of the things you observed. I know this was several years ago. You and I just celebrated milestone birthdays as well, too. So when you were talking about that age, I was just thinking about what was I doing at that age as well, too, and what was going on in my life. And interesting enough, I was becoming a father at that time as well, too. A whole nother story for another day, but a life-changing experience for me too. But I did want to circle back. Talk to me about how technology may have had any type of impact on your well-being, your recovery, your treatment, anything that stood out for you in that process, or quite honestly, lack thereof. And what do you see has emerged today?
Yeah, no, I like to focus on the positive, but I think I'll take your opportunity at the latter part of your question to say, or maybe something that didn't work so well that's improved. And that is, I think in my particular case, and this goes to patient advocacy, and you'll see what I mean when I get to it, but the challenge that I endured was that there wasn't a lot of collaboration across hospitals, across medical groups. And I had a very complex situation that required multiple reconstructive surgeons with lots of different disciplines. So a craniofacial guy might be at UCLA, a nasal reconstruction guy was in Chicago, et cetera, et cetera. There really wasn't any collaboration. There really wasn't this opportunity to level set in the beginning and say, this is the care professional team that we need to bring together.
Sure.
Let's have a collaboration, whatever it is, a conference call. It's going to take all of 30 minutes, and let's go through this patient's records and let's talk about what's the best approach to take. Instead, what happened was it was very serial, Christopher. So it was, okay, the most obvious thing is this guy's nose is sucked. So let's send him to the nasal guy. Unfortunately, and I'll keep this short, but unfortunately, the nasal guy kept down at procedures before he realized that everything was collapsing toward the cavity in my face, which should have been resolved first
Right.
by the craniofacial guy.
Sure.
So we had these kind of challenges. And so it's interesting you asked the question because collaboration has come a long ways, right? There's ways that doctors do a better job of that. I still think that there's a ways to go. However, I still think that's not necessarily the strongest suit. I think it's down to time and or lack thereof. But yeah, I think collaboration is so important with any kind of complex medical treatment. And you've had some yourself. You're never just going to go to one person at one place. And from a patient advocacy standpoint, patients need to be able to understand how this all works together and participate in that process.
Exactly.
They won't get a second opinion. Let's make sure that we bring this together in a manner that's effective for everybody. And technology can do a lot. Medical records obviously have come a long way and can do a lot. I think it was pretty rudimentary back then.
No, absolutely. Yeah. It's almost non-existent in terms of the clinical aspect of it anyway. And to your point, I think as you fast forward now where we are today, we see the advent of the electronic health record systems and technologies like AI and machine learning and this integration of systems that are allowing clinicians to more effectively collaborate. And not necessarily have to be physically in the same place to do that, but they can share information and collaborate in virtual environments. And I think also with the advent of things like augmented reality and technologies like that, doctors and clinicians can now simulate surgeries and create digital twins that allow them to, experiment or at least experiment. I'll use that experiment on how the best procedures to take in order to address these sort of very unique type of surgeries as well, too. And when I introduced you to another friend and colleague of mine, Robert Chelsea, he was the recipient of one of the first full facial transplants. Talk about reconstruction, right? That had to take place for his entire face and the myriad of challenges and issues associated with that. Again, very similar to yours as well, too. And so I think technology is advancing in a way that gives us greater confidence that we can do these more complex types of surgeries and have a much more positive outcome as well.
I think your point about digital twins is perfect. It's just so funny you bring that up. I literally was talking to somebody last Friday about digital twins in some context for the use cases across industries like healthcare.
Right.
But also for simple things like constant battle that IT professionals have, which is configuration errors.
Exactly.
Bending things like that, they're going to result in downtime. So using digital twins, but no, there's so much out there now that's improved. I'm just grateful I made it through.
Absolutely. Well, that's a testimony to your own personal intestinal fortitude, your belief in a higher power, and that the will to want to survive. And so I applaud you for that because so many other people may not have taken that same path as well. So you have a book as well, too, or I think maybe a couple books, and correct me if I'm wrong. So let's talk a little bit about you putting pen to paper and telling this story and how this has inspired you to share this with others.
Yeah, thanks, Christopher. So I think it started as a cathartic experience to write my story and share it just with myself and cry and laugh as I went through this stuff. And literally, I had crying episodes in front of my computer by myself. But I became very enthused by the fact that I was going to group therapy sessions with the cancer support community, and people started saying, you really got to write this book and you got to tell your story to inspire others. And so I did write it was a memoir, which I self-published back in 2001. And then a publisher picked that up a couple years later and we did a new edition with a publisher. And that was, again, another memoir about my story with really the focus being on that. Now I have finished another book that'll come out next year, which is more of a self-improvement book. And it's basically taking the concepts that I learned and helping others deal with adversity of any kind. And associated with adversity is oftentimes an impact to your self-esteem and self-confidence. It's a framework and a set of principles to help others in that process to be prepared and to be motivated to address their challenges as they go through life.
Absolutely. And it doesn't necessarily have to be a health issue. It could be the loss of a loved one, the loss of your job, a heartbreak, whatever it might be, resiliency is the key, right? How do you stay resilient in the midst of all these challenges that exist? And so, what would you want your, and obviously you've been extremely resilient through your journey as well, too. What's a takeaway that around that theme of resiliency that you can share with our listeners that you think would resonate well with them?
Yeah, maybe it's my mantra, Christopher, but I firmly believe that if people can be a little bit more open-minded or
Right.
a lot more open-minded
Exactly.
and basically be alert, aware, and attentive what's happening around you every day,
Absolutely.
and taking the opportunity to reflect. If you can build that into your day and a few minutes a day just to reflect and try to think about what you learned today,
Sure.
what may have inspired you today, what maybe did you learn that you could do differently? And I think that those are things that we can all easily do and take with us to find ways to help us be more resilient, right? Because we can't do it ourselves.
That's
It
right.
takes other people, other events that might impact us in ways that we never anticipated. For me personally, it had a lot to do with people I met along the way that
Sure.
I interacted with that said certain things that changed the trajectory of my life.
Absolutely.
And so as long as you're open to that and you're not resistant to it,
Mhm.
you just have to try to find a way to step back and say, someone's not necessarily criticizing me. They're telling me something about myself that
Exactly.
maybe I can learn from.
No, that's a great suggestion. And I know for me as well, I think there's two things I do when I go through those ebbs and flows of life. One, I literally try to count my blessings. Yeah, let's say I lost my job, but I woke up this morning.
Yep.
I can go out and get another job. Somebody didn't wake up today. Somebody wasn't able to get out of bed today to go pursue a job. I got a roof over my head. I've got food in my refrigerator. I've got a family that cares and love me. There are a lot of things that other people don't have. I'm in a country that's free to speak my mind. There are countries that you can't do that. And so I literally start to try to count my blessings and say life is really not that bad when I think about it in comparison to others who may not have the same blessings I have. And then the other thing I try to do is I try to give back to others as well too. Whether it's volunteering or getting involved in some sort of community-based activity or whatever. And I find for me, the nature of giving and helping others helps me as well too.
Absolutely.
It inspires me and makes me feel better about myself because I was able to help someone else in need as well too. And I like the suggestions you offered too, and then just being open to feedback to find ways to improve myself and be inspired by others as well. And when people are trying to inspire you, absorbing that in a positive way and not saying, what do you know? You have never had to deal with what I had to deal with, but taking it all in because it can in some ways improve your life and improve your outlook as well and maybe get you through that day. And in fact, I was having a conversation with, again, Robert. I'll just share this, very personal. And he was asking me how my day was. And I was like, it's not been that great of a day. And all these other things were going on. And he just said, okay, just take it one day at a time. Stop thinking so far ahead about all these other possibilities of doom and gloom and just say, let's get through this day. And if you can get through this day, then the next day will be better and the next day will be better. And it doesn't rain all the time, but sometimes the sun does come out and shines. I take that, and especially from someone who's gone through so much more than I have as well. This has been great, Terry. First of all, thank you so much for being so transparent about your own personal story and your journey. Are there any organizations, if someone like you that is going through a similar diagnosis as you, is there organizations or resources you would recommend they look into?
There are, broadly speaking, what I think is always beneficial, maybe not for everybody, but I think it's always worth a try, is these group therapy sessions with places like the Cancer Support Community, which is a national organization with locations all over for providing support services for cancer patients and their support people. But there's also, if anybody is dealing with any kind of a facial difference, there are a number of great organizations out there that are doing great work. One being My Face, another being Changing Faces, which is UK based, but they've they're fairly global at this point. And then there's many others, but those are great places to come together with other people that may have similar experiences. I think great resources. And then what I try to do on my own website on terryhealey.com is keep a whole list of other resources as well for people to go to and learn about everything from a white paper on a fibrosarcoma to just links to other cancer research or trials or
Right.
support organizations. Yeah.
No, that's great. I was going to ask you if someone wanted to reach you, how could they? And you gave the website. So I'm going to just ask you to do a redo. If someone wanted to reach you and find out more about your journey, your story, your books, how to maybe have you come and speak at some of their events, how would they get connected to you?
Yeah. So my website is terryhealey.com, TerryHealey.com. All my information is there, but sometimes it's easier just to give an email address. So it's terry@terryhealey.com. And love to engage with people, love to help people. That's my ministry. That's my purpose.
Wonderful.
So when people reach out with challenging things in their own lives, I do my best to share with them what I can and help them with the resources that I can. So
that's all we can do is reach one, inspire one, and hopefully that lights and ignites the resiliency for them to continue to move on in their life and do the same for others. Thank you so much, Terry, for sharing your journey with us today. Your strength, your wisdom is truly inspiring, and I know our listeners will take a lot away from this conversation. It's been a pleasure having you on Straight Outta Health IT, and got to have you back. Maybe if I can get you and Robert and a few other people on that just have this kind of group collaboration and tell us stories about our own journeys, I think that would be awesome as well, too. So that's it, guys. We're at the end of this session of Straight Outta Health IT. As always, thank you for taking time out your busy schedule to sit in and listen in on these conversations. If you like it and you enjoyed it, you found it inspiring, feel free to share this with others. Let's make it go viral. Share it with your friends, your colleagues, your coworkers, your enemies, anyone that can benefit from being better at being human as well, too. And Terry would appreciate that, and I would as well, too. As always, thank you for taking time to tune in and listen, and we'll see you on the other side. Take care, and God bless.
Thank you so much for listening to Straight Outta Health IT. We hope you enjoyed today's guest. For more unfiltered dialogue of healthcare leaders and influencers, be sure to tune in next week. For the show notes, transcripts, and resources, please visit Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or your favorite streaming platform. We invite you to give us feedback by reaching out to Christopher Cunny on LinkedIn, just searching for Straight Outta Health IT, and you'll find us. We are constantly having live discussions about diverse topics in the industry.